Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the No BS Zone. I'm Bernie Goldberg. I'm back with something resembling a voice. A couple of days ago, I couldn't talk at all. I had a bruise on my vocal cord, but I'm back, and I thank everybody who wished me well. I appreciate that very much, and I appreciate you, John Daly, very much for sitting in so ably as you did. Thank you, John.
Absolutely. It's great to have both you and your angelic voice back, Bernie. Your pipes heal faster than the doctors said they would, so that is a gift to us all.
You know, one day, a couple of days ago, I couldn't talk at all. I went to sleep, woke up the next day. It's like a miracle. Anyway, my voice is.
On the bright side, though, Bernie, did your wife Nancy did she sort of enjoy having some peace and quiet around the house for a little bit?
Why are you making trouble? Why are you
I
making?
thought maybe. I thought maybe.
Don't make trouble. Anyway, I want to talk. John and I want to talk today about a civil war. It's a real civil war, and it's really important. It's about the civil war in the Democratic Party. On the one hand, the establishment, the Chuck Schumers, Hakeem Jeffrey wing of the party, and on the other hand, the Social Democrats. And the energy, not just among young Social Democrats, but especially among young people, the energy is with the Social Democratic wing of the party. The question I'm ultimately going to ask John is, are they really a serious threat to the Democratic Party, or is this just something that goes on in blue districts like New York? The Social Democrats won big in New York. They won recently in Denver, Colorado, in a congressional district. They've won in Seattle. They won in Washington, D.C., all blue districts. But they stand for something that wants to fundamentally change the United States of America. The Democratic Socialists of America, and not all Democratic Socialists are a member of the party, but the Democratic Socialists of America Party, Zoran Mandani's party in New York. Let me tell you what they stand for. They want to abolish prisons. Brilliant. They want to abolish prisons. They want to have an open border. That worked out so well when Joe Biden was president. They want a 32-hour work week with no cut in pay or benefits. They want to replace the Supreme Court. They want to defund the Department of Defense. They want to defund the police. They want to abolish, no surprise here, they want to abolish ICE. They want to do away with the United States Senate and the presidency as we know it. Do away with it. Come up with a new system. And they are honest enough to say they want to end democracy. Now, people, all of you watching, reasonable people, they're likely to say, with some justification, the Democratic Party at large will never go along with this. Here's a Gallup poll about socialism versus capitalism among Democrats, not left-wing Democrats, not progressive Democrats, not Democratic Socialists, Democrats in general. 66% favor socialism over capitalism. Only 42% favor capitalism. So the question to all of you watching, and to you specifically, John, is the Democratic Party going to be taken over by the Democratic Socialists?
Yeah, I talked a little bit about this in your absence in an off the cuff, but I do think this is a potentially serious problem for the Democrats because the Democratic Socialist candidates, as you mentioned before, seem to have a lot of energy, and they are the ones that are getting the base excited. And that makes me think that we've already seen examples of this, that the party's leadership will at minimum, make allowances for them and try to normalize them as part of their coalition. I think the natural progression of which would likely pull the party even farther left. And you brought up these polls about socialism versus capitalism. Those are definitely concerning. I do think too that people don't really broadly understand what both of those terms are. In some cases, socialism, they don't understand the true darkness behind socialism. It's I was listening to a podcast the other day when it was mentioned that when people are polled about their thoughts on capitalism, it actually does. It's not nearly as popular if you use the term free markets. Do you believe in free markets? And then the positives are much higher. I don't think people understand that they're the same thing largely, and
Well,
I think there's an education issue behind it.
that's the Democrats' problem.
Oh
It's
yeah,
60,
yeah,
it's 66% of them say they favor socialism, and only 42% favor capitalism, whether they know what socialism is or not.
right.
They ought to know. They ought to know that socialism, that used to be a dirty word, socialism, not too long ago. My I grew up in a blue collar family. My parents, my mother and father, were both lifelong Democrats. They wouldn't recognize today's Democratic Party because they socialism was something they would have run away from. And you know what? This is the no BS zone. So let's cut the BS. The Democratic Socialist of America agenda sounds a lot like the Communist Party of America agenda. You know, let
Yeah,
me,
and I just mentioned too, you said not so long ago it was a dirty word, and that's really true because I remember just back when Barack Obama was president, during at the end of some press conference, I think some reporter, and I don't remember, basically asked him, and I think this probably had to do with when he was talking about Obamacare, but when a reporter actually asked him, are you a socialist? And he seemed like deeply offended by that, that question. And I think his press secretary came out later and kind of said, "Were you serious about that?" Because of course he's not. But now you have people that wear it on their sleeve in the Democratic Party.
that's the point. They're not just accepting it, they're embracing it.
Right.
Let me read you before we go on to another topic. Let me read you what Karl Rove said in the Wall Street Journal. And I wrote about this in my column this week. The Democratic Socialist of America platform is a huge gift for Republicans if they focus on its substance. And I just read to you a lot of its substance. For Democrats, it's a real threat, but also an opportunity. Wise Democrats will define themselves by what they're against, not only Mr. Trump, but also the hardcore socialists in their midst. Democrats need to find the courage, important. Democrats need to find the courage to say that the Democratic Socialist of America is a wrecking ball that threatens to destroy both the party and America. So before we move on, if you want to weigh in on this, do you think the Democrats have the courage to stand up and say, we don't accept this? Look, I've long argued that Republicans have become cowards. They won't stand up to the craziest things that Donald Trump comes up, not regular things, but the craziest things. They won't even stand up. They lack courage. Will Democrats have the courage to stand up to the crazies in their midst?
No, I don't think so. Well, some will. Some will. We heard Van Jones talk about this recently. There's a few others that will, but not enough. And I think, yeah, it is a lack of courage. And I've seen many people say, similar to what Karl Rove put in his column, that the Democrats, this is a great opportunity for a sister soldier moment. Like we saw with Bill Clinton, who took advantage of that.
Exactly.
And it worked well for him. I would love to see Democrats. We have some, you have John Fetterman, it's doing it, but not enough. He's sort of an outlier anyway. But yeah, more people should be speaking up about this because a party can absolutely be taken over by this insurgency from the outside. We've seen it before. So it's something they should take seriously. But I don't know if the courage is there. I haven't seen much evidence that it is.
I mean, who are the leaders of the Democratic Party? Technically, it's Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. Chuck Schumer wakes up every day praying that AOC is going to run for president, because if she doesn't, she's going to run against him and beat him in the primary.
Good point.
But who are the faces of the Democratic Party? AOC.
Yeah.
I'll tell you.
Mom Donnie.
Mom Donnie, I was going to say, he is the leader of the Democratic Party. He is articulate. He is charismatic. You don't have to like a word that comes out of his mouth. He can talk. He can talk well. And in politics, charisma goes a long way, and he's got it.
That's a good point. The framing is good there because they are the faces of the Democratic Party, even though they don't hold high leadership positions on a national level. When you think of where the energy is at, you think of Mamdani and AOC and those types of people.
And a recent Granite State poll in New Hampshire of all the Republicans, a Republican survey of who they think would be the number one choice in the primary in New Hampshire, and AOC beat everybody. AOC beat everybody. Not Kamala Harris, not Gavin Newsom, not any of the regular names everybody knows. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez came out first. I'm telling you, there's energy, and it's not something Democrats ought to take lightly. They ought to, if they could take over the party, and then it's going to be really interesting if the Republicans can take advantage of that. Anyway, let's move on. All of what we've been talking about have implications for the midterms. Trump approval ratings are way underwater. A Fox poll has him net negative on immigration. He's 57% negative on immigration, 66% negative on Iran, 67% negative on the economy, and 73% negative on inflation. So since the midterms are a report card on the president's approval and what people think of it, a reasonable person, John, would conclude this is going to be a wipeout for the Republicans. They're going to get hammered. It's going to be a big blue wave. I'm not so sure. I'm not at all sure, because there are fewer and fewer contested seats. With gerrymandering, that gives the GOP an advantage, could cut their losses. I'm going to break my rule and make a prediction. Democrats will win the House. That's not a big prediction. They will win the House, but not by much. What do you think, John?
Well, I've had the same sort of view for a while. Nothing's really changed, but yeah, the Democrats will definitely pick up the House. I don't know if it'll be by a wide margin or a small margin. I think the Senate will be a much harder road. I would not be surprised at all if the Republicans hold the Senate. The national polls, of course, as you went over a few, they continue to look very bad for Republicans, just from a raw sentiment perspective. But when you consider, as you said, that there really are few contested seats, that doesn't really matter as much. The nation can have a really sour perception of Republicans, but if the seats aren't there, it's not going to make that much of a difference. What matters are these individual races. So because there are relatively few of them, that could be a cushion for Republicans. So I think we'll end up with a continued poor outlook of the Republican Party, but I don't think it'll be maybe as reflected as strongly in the midterm elections. But I could be wrong.
Well, on paper, and elections aren't held on paper, but on paper, this should be a very bad year for Republicans, given all the numbers on Trump's approval or disapproval. Let's move on to another topic, and this is very big in the news. The filibuster. Donald Trump wants Republicans in the Senate to kill the filibuster so they can pass the Save America Act. Killing the filibuster to Save America Act, that's a very bad idea, a very bad idea. But Trump may very well be right when he says, if the Republicans don't kill the filibuster, Democrats will. And if they abolish it, they will do all the things they want to do. This is from the Wall Street Journal this week. If the filibuster went away, Democrats with a mere 50 votes plus a vice presidential tiebreaker could wreck the Supreme Court, add new states, pass Medicare for all, prohibit right-to-work laws, codify Roe v. Wade, create a national gun registry, raise the minimum wage to $25 an hour, and so much more. I don't think that's crazy thinking. Now, I know you've said in the past, and you're right, John, it would take a presidential, a president of the same party, a Democratic president, to sign off on it. So if you have a Democratic Senate and if you have a Democratic president, I think they will kill the filibuster, and all of this wish list that they have will become a nightmare for the nation.
I mean, it's certainly possible. Again, neither one of us wants the filibuster broken, taken away. For me, it's for the sake of the institution, and frankly, the parties make that very easy for me to feel that way, just above the constitutional argument. Neither party has shown that they are willing to do or maybe capable of doing wise things with even less accountability and fewer incentives to build a consensus. But this won't be so. The filibuster issue, if it does go away, I don't think it is. I think John Thune has made it quite clear that it's not going to happen. With the Senate, they're not going to decide on that. Which is kind of a surprise, because they usually, the Republican Party largely does what Trump wants them to do. But I think he's having a much harder time with this one, maybe because they, finally perceive him as a lame duck. But none of these things that we were talking about, the statehood, the court packing could ever happen with Trump in office. But conceivably, if a Democrat comes in 2028, Democrats get the Senate, Democrats get the House. There's a lot of ifs there, but if that happens, I think it'll depend on who that Democratic president is. If it is an AOC and she does win, yeah, I can see her doing that sort of thing. I can see her doing all kinds of radical things with that power. So
I can't see any Democrat president vetoing it.
Oh, I mean, if it's like a Josh Shapiro, Fetterman or Josh Shapiro, I think there's some other ones too. But I think someone like AOC would do what she could to get that taken away and have more power for the executive office for sure.
If anybody thinks John Daly is high talking about AOC as a possible president, he's not. That is not a crazy possibility any longer. It used to be, no longer. Now, I was going to end, and I told John about this. I wanted to end with President Trump's speech last week to the White House Correspondents Association dinner. And then I said, no, because what I want to say is really negative about Trump. And there's plenty that Trump does that we comment on that's negative. And then I said to John, minutes before we started today, let's kill it. And I'll tell you in a second what John said to me. But what I was going to say, but I'm not going to say today, but what I was going to say is that in the history of speeches, going back to Aristotle and Plato in Athens, to Jesus in Nazareth, Moses, Abraham, speeches of Winston Churchill, FDR, the speeches of Joe Blow in Sheboygan, Wisconsin, at a Rotary Club meeting on a Tuesday afternoon. Every speech ever uttered in the history of planet Earth. Donald Trump's speech last week was the worst speech ever uttered in any language in the history of the planet. But then I said, no, that would be wrong to do that, to say that, because that would offend some of our intelligent subscribers who happen to like Donald Trump. And I said, Daly, let's kill it. And Daly said to me,
yeah, I said, Bernie, I said I hadn't even watched it. And then Bernie proposed this topic. And so I'm like, okay, I'll watch it. And it was painful. And then he was going to cut the whole segment out after I had watched it and exposed myself to that pain. So I thought
he said, give me a chance to say something about it.
You want to say something about it?
No, you said, come on.
Yeah, I will. Okay, very good. Yeah. So yeah, it was painful. So let's concede, in fairness, the comedy is hard because it is, but with a scripted Trump, it's even harder. Trump felt in some cases like he needed to explain the jokes halfway into the jokes before he was actually finished telling it. In other cases, the topic of the joke would remind him of something else and set him off in this different direction where he just kind of rambled on and on through different anecdotes and different musings until he remembered that there was, the next joke, or maybe he remembered the punchline of the current joke. It was extremely painful to watch. I don't know if I'd put it in the worst in history, but it was pretty bad.
You're wrong. You're wrong.
It really, I will say, Bernie, did you hear? Because I did think there was at least one really good joke, and that was the one about RFK running over a cow. I thought that was very good.
There was one good joke that he totally destroyed. The joke should have been told this way. This old woman says to her husband, "Come upstairs and make love to me." And he says, "I can't do both." That's funny. Trump totally, timing is everything. And Trump had no timing. But you know what? I'm proud of myself that I'm not saying out loud that it was the worst joke in history, because I said, I'm not going to do that. That would be unfair to some of our fans listening to us who like Donald Trump. So I didn't say it was the worst. I was going to say it, but I'm glad I didn't actually say it.
Very big of you. Very big of you, Bernie.
Yeah. On that note, on the no BS zone, I'm actually BSing, right? What do you make of that? On that note, I'm going to say adios, people. I'm glad I'm back. Thank you again. Those of you who said, one of you, by the way, said, I want a picture to make sure he's not like McConnell in a hospital bed. Thanks. Thanks a lot. All right.
Proof of life. We needed proof of life, Bernie.
Say goodbye, John.
Okay, goodbye, John.